What's up, my comic comrades? I think the majority of us would agree that the DCEU is in utter disarray, to say the least. They haven't had a clear path forward since Warner Brothers brought in Joss Whedon to fix the Justice League following the unfortunate departure of Zack Snyder. More recently, we've seen a number of crazy dramas play out with the DCEU cast members like Amber Heard, who plays Mera, and Ezra Miller, who plays The Flash, along with a ton of other issues that have come along with the Discovery acquisition of Warner and DC. More specifically, the new Warner CEO has been canceling DC projects left and right. And while much of that absolutely needed to happen to create a more definitive course for the franchise, the question remains, how on earth will they salvage the DCEU? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode. Before I get into it, I do want to preface that I'm not completely hating on the DCEU. They have put out several good films. But overall, DC's put out more films that were polarizing for fans than not, and that's never a good sign. So let's go over a few directions they could take to hit the reset button and give us a clean slate going forward, which is desperately needed at this point. Believe it or not, even with all the confusion of the past few years, Warner Brothers has a relatively good number of options for how they can get themselves back on track with the DCEU. Let's start with the most obvious way to fix it, simply by starting over. Just cut their losses and begin from scratch. As unfortunate as that would be, since the DCEU began in 2013 with Man of Steel, a lot of people have been wanting them to do this. As for my personal thoughts on them starting from scratch, I'm kind of torn. I think that could 100% work, but I do think there's an even better option than just axing everything and starting from ground zero. Because again, the DCEU has a ton of problems, but it's also given us quite a few good films and some great castings. For starters, Henry Cavill's Superman. I think most of us would agree he is a fantastic Superman. The only issue I've ever had with his performance is the writing. He's been made to do some questionable things like the infamous killing of Zod in Man of Steel. Besides that, Henry Cavill is the perfect Superman. Not to mention, he's a fellow massive nerd and wants to play the character. We've all been dying for a Man of Steel too, but for whatever reason, Warner Brothers is just sitting on their hands. By the time they decide to use Henry Cavill for a solo Superman film again, they're gonna have to do a Kingdom Come Superman because he'll be like 60. Although, having said that out loud, Henry Cavill would be a dope older Kingdom Come Superman. But the point is, he still has several years left to give us a youthful Superman in his prime, and that's what we've all been wanting. We'd also be losing Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, who I think is fantastic. I've been very vocal about the first Wonder Woman film being my favorite DCEU movie. I think it captures the character and what it means to be a superhero perfectly, and Gal Gadot is the perfect combination of badass, elegant, and beautiful. It would also mean getting rid of Jason Momoa Aquaman, which I've become quite fond of. Originally, I was skeptical about him playing the King of Atlantis, but after seeing him in his solo film and the Snyder Cut, I'm completely on board and dig the DC Extended Universe version of Aquaman. Sure, it's very different from the comics where Aquaman is more of a regal king, but the Jason Momoa version works for me. Plus, I would hate to see him not be able to continue being Aquaman after Aquaman just became the King of Atlantis. Then, of course, you have John Cena as Peacemaker, who is phenomenal and easily one of the best things to happen to the DCEU. I'm also a fan of Ben Affleck Batman, minus the excessive killing, but whether they start from scratch or not, it seems like Ben Affleck is moving on either way. We would also lose Zachary Levi Shazam, who I really dig. Shazam was one of my favorite DC characters, and I think his solo film was a ton of fun. It definitely captured the Jeff Johns version of Shazam near perfectly. All in all, rebooting the DCEU could work in the grand scheme of things, but we would also be losing a lot of great castings and characters we've become fond of in the franchise. Because for all of the missteps, the DC Extended Universe has also given us several hits. It's definitely a way to fix things. It might technically be best long term, but it would be very sad to lose all the things we've come to love in the DC film franchise over the last decade or so. But even if a complete reboot is the best thing long term, let's be honest, there's slim to no chance Warner Brothers would actually go through with that. They've already invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into their 11 films released to date, including the 2 versions of the Justice League. Not to mention their first HBO Max show connected to the universe, Peacemaker. That doesn't even count the 6 films that are currently shooting or already shot and being released soon, like Black Adam, Shazam Fury of the Gods, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, The Flash, and Blue Beetle. I mean, yes, they did axe Batgirl and several other DC projects, but I feel like that's different, as Batgirl may have been taking the DCEU down a path they didn't want to go. So, axed. As for others like the Caped Crusader, they're just trying to free up money. So the likelihood of them being like, yeah, let's just start over after investing millions and spending the last decade building this universe is probably not going to happen. Or at least they're not going to start from ground zero, especially with Black Adam rumored to set the DCEU down a new path. But I've learned, never say never. In fact, if I was head of Warner Brothers or the DC film division, I wouldn't start from scratch. There's a better option, which I've been saying forever on Variant the Podcast, basically a way to have your cake and eat it too. The answer to all of Warner Brothers and fans' problems can be summed up in one word, which I'm going to say 3 times to try to wish it into existence like it's mother freaking Beetlejuice. Flashpoint, Flashpoint, Flashpoint. With that said, the solo Flash movie may be pulling elements from Flashpoint, but we don't know to what extent or if it will reset the entire DCEU. So indulge me, if you will, as I'm talking about a proper Flashpoint movie that would change all continuity going forward and even give us a reverse Flash and Thomas Wayne Batman. I've been saying for years now, Flashpoint is the answer to all of Warner Brothers' prayers. It is the perfect scapegoat that's from the comic books that would allow them to rewrite and change anything they want going forward. It would allow everything to continue making sense while still being comic accurate at the same time. Meaning you would please the fans because we all love the Flashpoint storyline, but you would also get the freedom to change and fix whatever continuity or character you want going forward. Heck, you could recast everyone if you wanted to, and with Flashpoint, it would make sense. For those of you who don't know, here's a brief rundown of the iconic Flashpoint storyline by Jeff Johns. Essentially, the Flashpoint story focuses on Barry Allen going back in time to try to save his mother. But in doing so, he creates the Flashpoint timeline, which is a dark alternate timeline that gives us different versions of the characters we know. For instance, Flashpoint Batman is Thomas Wayne, who became Batman because the night the Waynes went into Crime Alley and got robbed, Thomas and Martha survived while Bruce got shot and killed. We also learned that Reverse Flash was messing with things as usual behind the scenes. But the point is that by the end of the story, when Barry Allen Flash comes back to the main reality, him running through the time stream and doing all the Flash stuff messed up everything and created a new main continuity, aka the New 52. That's right, the Flashpoint storyline and Barry Allen, along with a few other factors, are responsible for the creation of the New 52, which was our main DC continuity for 5 years, starting in 2011 and lasting until 2016, before ultimately getting rebooted again. So in Flashpoint, they use a Flash solo story to rewrite the entire DC Comics universe. That being the case, the DC Extended Universe can and should make a Flashpoint movie to rewrite and fix things in the DCEU. Granted, with Ezra Miller going all crazy town, that would unfortunately mean he would have to do one more film for DC. Kind of. They could still pull an Edward Norton Mark Ruffalo, as Edward Norton was the original Hulk for the MCU, but he was recast without explanation for the Avengers. They did the same exact thing with War Machine. Terrence Howard was originally James Rhodey, but the character was recast for Iron Man 2 with Don Cheadle in the role. So Warner Brothers can totally just do that for the Flash. Just recast him and don't explain it. We all get why. So make a proper Flashpoint movie. And in the Flashpoint movie, you could fix so many issues like introducing a new Batman. As we all know, Ben Affleck Batman is done. Actually, the Flash movie is probably going to set up what Batman we're going to have going forward, or at least I would assume so, given that both Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton Batman are in this film, and Keaton Batman was going to be in the Batgirl movie. As much as I absolutely love Keaton Batman, I don't necessarily want him to be the main DC Extended Universe Batman going forward, as I think we need a younger main Batman. Unless they're using Keaton to ultimately set up Terry McGinnis, aka Batman Beyond, and Keaton will just turn into old man Bruce Wayne, then I am completely down. But besides even the whole Batman dilemma the DC Extended Universe has going on right now, along with some continuity issues, the biggest issue us fans have been complaining about is a clear path forward. Warner Brothers and DC have just been throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, as far as tone and where this universe is all headed. Don't get me wrong, that's fine. One of the things that makes the Marvel Cinematic Universe great is every movie is different. You could have a crime heist like the first Ant-Man movie, then you could have a weird sitcom style show like WandaVision, or a grand epic like Infinity War and Endgame. The difference is the MCU, at least before Phase 4, was on a very clear path forward as to where everything was going. And that's what the DCEU needs. It's not enough to be like, oh, they're referring to Superman in the Justice League and Peacemaker, which don't get me wrong, that's pretty cool, and I love seeing how everything lives within the same universe, but at the end of the day, if it all isn't leading to something greater, does it really matter? You have to have something to make all those fun cameos and connectivity mean something, which for the case of superheroes would usually mean some greater threat that brings all of them together. Just think about any great comic book event. It takes all those heroes we've been reading in solo titles, or a good amount of them, to come together and beat a massive threat. That's literally the DC and Marvel superhero formula. You have all your individual titles, but then once or twice a year you have some big event that brings most of those characters together to fight a greater threat. Then they go off and do their own things again, and then come back together the following year. It's just how the comic space works, and for the most part, we love it, which is pretty clear from comics standing the test of time. And now the biggest thing in cinema for the last decade or so has been that exact formula in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it just baffles me that this formula has been set in place since the 40s and 50s, and for some reason, DC and Warner Brothers just aren't using their own system. The comics are literally a template, a storyboard for you to just translate into live action. You don't have to translate it perfectly, but it's literally your outline. It's a big reason why the MCU is so successful, because they use their own source material as an outline most of the time and just translate it, adapting things here and there into their movies and shows. Don't get me wrong, the MCU is far from perfect. They've done some very questionable things. I'm looking at you, Taskmaster. But I think it's more than fair to say, at least for the first 10 years, they've knocked it out of the park and translated the stories they adapted from comics for the big screen pretty well. If Marvel can do it from the beginning, Warner Brothers and DC can use Flashpoint to give themselves a fresh start, yet still using most of the continuity they've already established. You have Barry go back in time, try to save his mom, and just like the comic, it doesn't work, and when he returns back to the main timeline, things are different with a new clear path and tone going forward. Again, they could change as much or as little as they want. Flashpoint is their scapegoat to have their cake and eat it too, or reset without completely resetting. Heck, DC Comics has been shifting their continuity once a year for like the last 5 years or so. So I think the DC Extended Universe could do it at least once. And as a bonus, the Flashpoint movie would also introduce us to Flashpoint Batman Thomas Wayne, and we've all been wanting to see him for a very long time. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who played Thomas Wayne in BVS, has even said he's more than willing to return as Flashpoint Batman. And Lauren Cohen, who played Martha Wayne in BVS, said she would return as Flashpoint Joker to be the Joker of the Flashpoint timeline. That would be amazing. All of us DC fans would be drooling over that. DC, you gotta see that your answer to everything is Flashpoint. As for the third and final way DC could fix things going forward, which would be the simplest and quickest way, is just adding a scene to the solo Flash movie that shows Barry messing up the timeline and giving us a very quick mini version of Flashpoint to explain all the new changes going forward. For all we know, something like that is already in the film, but you know, who knows? We already know the Flash movie is going to be messing with timelines and the multiverse, as Keaton Batman, Supergirl, and another version of Barry Allen are in the movie. However, there's rumors of major rewrites, so we're just going to have to wait and see. They could very well be gearing up for a reset, or maybe they have a different plan. For me personally, I hope it's a full Flashpoint movie. Come on, guys, you know where my head's at. In any case, those are 3 ways Warner Brothers could fix the DCEU and start with a fresh slate moving forward. But how would you fix the DCEU? Let us know in the comments. And that's going to bring today's episode to a close, but if you like this episode, check this one out right here. And if you like all of our content, like, subscribe, and comment. It helps out the algorithm. But other than that, I'll see you next time when I talk about all things comics.